Hey everyone, today we are looking into the life of Barbara Woolworth Hutton, an heiress to the Woolworth family fortune. When she was still a teenager, she became one of the wealthiest women in the world. Despite this, her life was scarred by multiple tragedies, and after 7 marriages and lavish spending, she squandered her $1 billion fortune. This is her story. Barbara Woolworth Hutton was born in New York City on the 14th of November 1912. Her father was Franklin Laws Hutton, a wealthy co-owner and founder of E.F. Hutton & Company, a New York-based investment banking and financial company. However, while her father was successful in his own right, Barbara's future wealth would ascend to her through her mother, Edna Woolworth. Edna Woolworth was one of 3 children of the American businessman Frank Winfield Woolworth. In the late 19th century, Frank Woolworth had made an enormous amount of money after pioneering the concept of 5 and dime shops, retail stores in which everything generally was priced at 5 or 10 cents, the forerunner of the modern-day dollar or pound shop. Woolworth's idea was enormously successful, and just months after Barbara was born, he opened the Woolworth Building in New York, the company headquarters, which cost $13.5 million to build, and which was the tallest building in the world until 1930. Despite her family's wealth, Barbara's childhood was very troubled. Her father was a serial philanderer, engaging in a string of extramarital affairs, and he was not exactly discreet in these. Moreover, he was also a neglectful father and a heavy drinker. Thus, when Barbara's mother died suddenly on the 2nd of May 1917, at just 33 years of age, many people suspected that she had taken her own life. The coroner's report officially stated that she had died from suffocation brought on by mastoiditis, a serious infection of the ear, nose and throat system, but the fact that an autopsy was never performed led many to doubt the veracity of this. Her mother's passing was especially cruel for Barbara, as it was she who had found her mother's lifeless body. She had only been 5 years old, but the memory surely stayed with her. Thereafter, her father effectively sent her off to be raised by a governess and to attend a series of private schools in New York and in Farmington, Connecticut. In the years that followed, events occurred which would shape the rest of her life. In 1919, her maternal grandfather, the founder of Woolworths, died. And then in 1924, her maternal grandmother also passed. As the only child of Edna Woolworth, Barbara now inherited the 1/3 of the Woolworth estate, which would have descended to her mother. This amounted to nearly $30 million at the time, a sum equal to over $500 million in today's money. Barbara did not have access to this money immediately, given her youth, and her father invested it well enough on her behalf that when she finally acquired direct control over it in the early 1930s, the value of it exceeded $50 million, a sum in excess of $1 billion today. By the time she acquired this vast estate, Barbara had already acquired a reputation within American high society, and not a good one. In late 1929, the Wall Street Stock Exchange had taken enormous losses after the economic boom of the 1920s. In the months that followed, the American and world economy drifted into the Great Depression, as many lost their savings, and millions of Americans ended up out of work. It was thus viewed as socially toxic when Barbara's family held an ostentatious debutante ball for her in New York, on the occasion of her 18th birthday in November 1930, one which included guest singing by Rudy Vallee, one of the leading entertainers of the day, and cost over $60,000. A sum equivalent to over $1 million in modern terms. This was incredibly inappropriate given that financiers such as the Huttons were largely seen as having caused much of the country's economic woes, and Barbara was savagely attacked in the press as a result. They referred to her as the poor little rich girl, a reference to her great fortune and also her troubled family background. It was a moniker which would characterize much of her adult life as well. Barbara Hutton's life is perhaps most memorable for her many marriages, 7 in all. The first of these was entered into when she was just 20 years of age and was to Alexei Midovani. He was the scion of a Georgian family which had fled from the Caucasus in the early 1920s, claiming they were being persecuted by the Soviet authorities there. The family were social climbers, and when he met Barbara, Alexis was already married to Louise Van Allen, a member of the wealthy Astor family. He quickly divorced her to marry Barbara, who was wealthier, on the 22nd of June 1933. As one might have expected from such a figure, he immediately began spending vast amounts of Barbara's money, on top of the $1 million dowry that had been provided to the Midovani family as part of the union. By the time Barbara realized exactly what was afoot and divorced him in the summer of 1935, she had lost a considerable amount of money. Barbara's second marriage was even less successful. This was to Kurt Horgvitz Reventlow, a minor Danish noble. They were married just weeks after her split from Alexis, but the marriage soon deteriorated. He was both physically and emotionally abusive, a situation which led Barbara to begin drinking heavily and taking drugs, habits which she would never kick. She also developed anorexia during their 3-year marriage. Her relationship with Kurt was complicated by their having a child, a boy called Lance, who was born in 1937 and who would be Barbara's only child. It has been speculated that Barbara's anorexia was calculated to ensure that she could not have another child, and indeed, it did result in her inability to become pregnant. However, there is no doubting that she bore some affection towards her son Lance. She successfully contested with Kurt to have custody of him when they divorced in 1938, and while she did send him to be raised by a governess and at private boarding schools, this was simply reflective of her own upbringing and hardly unusual for American high society of the 1930s. While her marriage to Kurt had been a dreadful experience, Barbara entered into a slightly happier time in her life in the years that followed. When the Second World War broke out in September 1939, she became an active fundraiser for the cause in America, a country which was sympathetic towards the plight of Britain, France, and the other victims of Nazi aggression in Europe, but which was unwilling to enter the war in its earlier years. Hutton provided funding and actively campaigned for further aid to the Free French after France was conquered in the summer of 1940. By this time she had moved to California and was using her profile to actively sell war bonds once the US entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii in December 1941. It was while she was here that her relationship with the actor Cary Grant intensified. Barbara had met the star of Bringing Up Baby, His Girl Friday, and The Philadelphia Story some years earlier through their mutual acquaintance, the millionaire and philanthropist Howard Hughes. They married in July 1942, and they were mockingly nicknamed Cash and Cary by the media. The union was one of her happier ones, though it too did not last long, and they divorced in 1945. However, Grant never tried to acquire any of Barbara's money, and they both claimed that they remained close friends long after their divorce. After her marriage to Grant ended, and with the Second World War over, Hutton moved to Europe for several years. There she married Prince Igor Trubetskoy, a French aristocrat and athlete of Russian descent, in 1947. He used Barbara's money to aid in his efforts to become one of Europe's leading race car drivers, as professional car racing was entering its first golden age in the late 1940s. The union, as with all of Barbara's, ended just after a few years when they divorced in 1951. She did not respond well to this, and the collapse of her fourth marriage, combined with her spiraling drug and alcohol abuse and anorexia, led Barbara to attempt to take her own life. What was worse, news of this leaked out to the media in the early 1950s, and Barbara Hutton was once again reported on in the US and European media as the poor little rich girl, over 20 years after first acquiring that moniker. In December 1953, Barbara stumbled into her fifth and briefest marriage. This was with Porfirio Rubirosa, a diplomat and playboy from the Dominican Republic. It was perhaps Barbara's most unusual relationship. Porfirio had previously been married to Doris Duke, an American heiress of the Duke tobacco family fortune. Doris and Barbara had been born within days of each other in 1912, were two of the wealthiest women in the world, and had developed a curious rivalry over the years. She had married Rubirosa in 1947, but the marriage ended after a brief time, with Rubirosa acquiring an enormous financial settlement in the divorce proceedings. Now, Barbara seemed to be adding salt to the wound by marrying her rival's ex-husband. The view that it was a sham marriage would certainly be suggested by how long it lasted, or didn't last, as the case may be. Hutton and Rubirosa divorced after just 53 days. He once again walked away with a large settlement. Bizarrely, Rubirosa acquired a converted B-25 bomber plane in his divorce settlement from both Duke and Hutton. Barbara would marry 2 further times. Her 6th marriage was to Baron Gottfried Alexander von Kram, a professional German tennis player whom she had known for some years and who had won the French Open twice in the 1930s. They wed in 1955 and divorced in 1959. After that, Barbara married just once more, to Prince Raymond Duan Wienhana-Champasak, a Lao aristocrat. Their marriage lasted just over a year in the mid-1960s. Barbara's 7th marriage was her last. By the time it ended in the mid-1960s, her life was taking on a tragic appearance. Her alcohol and drug problems combined with her anorexia had resulted in many health problems by the time she reached her 50s, while her lavish spending and divorce settlements had resulted in a huge proportion of her vast wealth being spent, stolen or squandered over the years. Much of this was also owing to her own great generosity. Friends and acquaintances always knew she would listen to their requests for financial support for one endeavour or another, but this left a woman who was frequently intoxicated, also open to exploitation. This tragic later life was compounded in 1972, when her only child Lance, from her 2nd marriage, was killed in an air accident in his mid-30s. After this, Barbara became increasingly reclusive. She sold some of her homes to try and stabilise her finances, and moved into the penthouse of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Los Angeles in the mid-1970s. It was here that she lived out the last period of her life, addicted to painkillers and alcohol, and nearly blind. She died of a heart attack there on the 11th of May 1979, at 66 years of age. At the time, it was widely believed that she had just $3,500 left in her name, having been one of the world's richest women a half a century earlier, though it is unclear what wealth she actually possessed, if her assets were included. In any event, it was a tragic end to the life of America's prominent poor little rich girl. Thank you everyone for watching this video on Barbara Hutton. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down in the comments, and if you have any suggestions, also leave them in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. That's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.